Right, can everyone hear my audio levels? Great, I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes more. We've got a few more sign-ups we're waiting for, so probably give it another minute or so, and then we'll crack on. I hope everyone's new year has started well. Okay, I'm going to crack on. So welcome to part 3 of my series of webinars about Cel-Fi. For those of you that were here for parts 1 and 2, hi again. If you weren't here for parts 1 and 2, let me know and I'll get you videos of those. They're all going up on YouTube now anyway, so you can always get access to older versions. Next week I'll be doing the final part, which is about the Quattro series, but today we're going to be talking about the GoX. So I will crack on. So just a couple of introductions. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joe Fletcher. I'm the head of technical services for OneAV. So I generally oversee all of our more complex projects and our more complex products, like Cel-Fi. Cel-Fi is not such a straightforward product. A little bit of knowledge is needed to install it, and that's kind of my area. Okay, about OneAV. So I'm assuming that most of you, given that you're on our mailing list, probably have used OneAV. But we are a sort of a new AV distribution company. We've been around for about 3 years, and we tend to focus on trying to keep up to date on the latest tech. So we're always distributing new products. We're the first people, for instance, to think about looking into a mobile boosting technology. So the goals of the session, I would like you by the end of this to be able to understand the key features of the GoX, understand when and where you would use a GoX, and also how to configure a GoX system. So for those of you that haven't seen the previous parts, Cel-Fi, owned by an American company called Nextivity. Cel-Fi is currently one of the only legal solutions in the UK for doing mobile boosting. Today, the product we're going to be looking at is the slightly lower end product they do for sort of smaller residences and smaller businesses. The next week, we'll be looking at the Quattro system, which is what you would look at for your sort of your larger installs, bigger houses, when you've got multiple wings and things like that. So a little bit of information about the Cel-Fi GoX. So the GoX can provide up to 100 dBs of gain. What that means is if you have a signal that is of a strength of, say, minus 90 dB. We talked about this a little bit in one of the previous sessions, but essentially it has a maximum range. It can provide up to 100 dB of additional gain. That is in line with the UK regulations on how much you are actually legally allowed to boost a signal by. So 100 dB is the max, and that's what the system does. It's the most powerful and safest signal booster in its class. So when we say in its class, the class it is in is RF-based signal boosting. So first key thing to understand about the Cel-Fi GoX is internally, all of the cabling you'll use is RF cable. So it's all coax. There's stuff like the Quattro system, which is more powerful. The Quattro system actually uses a combination of RF and CAT cabling. The benefit of using CAT cabling over RF cable is with CAT cable, you get no loss. So that's why we recommend Quattro for bigger properties, because actually you can have hundreds of meters of cabling. And because it's CAT cable, there isn't any loss on that. But again, that's for next week. So some of the feature set. So ideally, you'd use it in small commercial, agricultural, small manufacturing, rural business, and small and mid-sized homes. there is definitely a point with the GoX where properties can become too big to realistically do a GoX based installation. There's a limit to how many times you can split. I will show you later in this presentation an example of what I would say is probably the biggest you can go with a GoX. So it has support for 3G and 4G, so voice and data. As a general rule of thumb, you can expect on a GoX system to do about 15,000 square meters of coverage per system. It's IP66 rated. I'll explain in a second exactly what that means. It's network safe. Just to give you an idea about what network safe means that it won't interfere with any other aspects of the house. If there is an RF lighting based system and there's a Wi-Fi system and there's Sonos and there's all this other sort of wireless stuff, the frequencies that Cel-Fi operate on do not interact with those in any way. So it's completely safe. It's not going to impact anything. So a quick note about IP rating. With IP ratings, what it stands for is ingress protection. What that basically means is it defines what situations the product can be installed. So the Cel-Fi GoX has an IP rating of 6.6. So the first digit, this is actually the highest possible ratings. With IP ratings, the first digit is your intrusion protection, and the highest possible rating a product can get is a 6. So totally dust tight, full protection against dust and other particulates, can be vacuum sealed, tested against continuous airflow. So this is the highest possible rating. The second digit is for moisture protection. So this is rated at a 6. So that's protection against direct high pressure jets. The next level up will be protection against full immersion for up to 30 minutes. So essentially what that means is this can go anywhere except underwater. So the reason we have the GoX, and I'll talk a little bit about the alternative to the GoX, which is called the Solo, but the GoX is designed essentially to be able to be installed in any location. Typically, you might install the GoX, for instance, in a loft, or it can even go outdoors. It's designed to be sort of very robust and able to put anywhere. The alternative to the GoX is something called the Solo, which functionally, and I've got a slide about it in a second, but functionally it's very much the same thing as the GoX, the Solo, but it doesn't have that ingress protection rating. So the Solo can only go indoors and is basically designed to go in, a living room or something like that. Next slide. So, I think in the first session I did, I explained about the different bands that are utilised in the UK. And essentially the way the GoX works is the GoX has 2 radios in it. So what that means is it can actually boost 2 different bands simultaneously. So what it will look to do is to ideally relay 1 high band and 1 low band. So it would use the high band for, say, data. So you might get your 4G on the high band, and the low band will be for your voice. Now, it can actually do 2 high bands, and it will do that automatically if it decides that actually it's going to perform better boosting 2 high bands. But typically what it will do is it will boost multiple bands and choose the bands it boosts so that you get the best performance. So generally when you're setting up a system, what you'll normally find in almost all situations, it normally goes for band 20 and band 1. So band 1, band 20, which is 800 megahertz, and then band 1, which is 2100 megahertz. So what that will give you is very robust voice on 3G at band 20, and then it's also boosting band 1 for data. It won't always do that, but as a general rule, assuming mobile signal is good, that will give the customer the best performance. The nice thing about this is you don't really have to worry about it. The device is self-configuring, so it will choose the bands for you. But if for some reason you wanted to change that, or you wanted to boost particular bands, it is possible to configure that. But yeah, so it will actually boost multiple bands. So the goal of which is to provide good 3G and good 4G simultaneously. If it only had 1 radio, in it, it would have to choose to be the Boost 4G or 3G, but because it's got two, it can do both at the same time. And the way you configure this is with something called the Network Wave app. The last part of this slideshow is me just walking you through how this works, but that is how this product is configured. So it's shipped blank, so essentially it's shipped without a network, and then what you do is you log into it with the app and you choose which network you want it to be on. Just for your reference, all the images that I've got for this, because my demo one is out being reviewed at the moment, I wasn't able to load up the app on my phone and get some pictures, so they're all going to be using American networks. Watch this space. I think next month there's going to be a review in EI for the Solo, and that's my demo unit that I took down to get reviewed. So I wasn't able to get any new pictures of the app for you, so I've used some old ones that are American, but you have to forgive me for that. So a bit of information about the hardware. So firstly, there's two SMA connectors. So there's an SMA in and an SMA out. So essentially the SMA in is for the antenna and the SMA out is going to be for your internal antenna. There's a mounting bracket, so it can be mounted. This can either be mounted flat or in a rack, or if you want it nailed to the wall, you can do that as well. There's a single LED on top. That will tell you basically how things are working. So what you want to be seeing is a solid green light. If you have a flashing green, it means it's configuring. If you've got flashing red, it means there's a problem. You need to log into it with the app. And just on the bottom, there's a power jack and a switch to turn it on, and a little breather panel that's just for moisture in it, getting moisture out. You don't need to worry about that. Essentially, it's very simple to plug in. All you'll be plugging in is the power jack and then an antenna in and an antenna out. And you'll see shortly how that is done. So a quick note about the Solo. So if any of you read EI, you'll see next month there is a review of the Solo coming out. And spoiler as ahead, it's a very, very good review. But I have one of these that we use in the office, and I gave that to them to review. And just so you know, so obviously it's possible for you to buy either the Solo or the GoX. Generally, we tend to recommend that as installers, you're probably going to want to buy the GoX, just because it can be it's more robust than the Solo. The Solo is kind of designed more for the retail market, where it's just something you can just buy and plug in yourself and just leave it and it'll do its thing. So it comes with like a small aerial and lots of little bits of kit that you might need. The GoX doesn't come with that. The GoX doesn't come with any aerials. So the idea is you choose the aerial you want and where you're going to mount it, and you're going to run all the cabling through the house. The GoX is also a little bit cheaper. So I would expect most of you guys, when you're installing Cel-Fi, to be installing GoX or Quattro systems. The Solo is available if they want it. The one benefit of the Solo is the Solo actually has a modem built into it. So if you wanted to remotely monitor it or change what network it's on, you can do that. A good use case for that was I've done a couple of installs for Airbnb properties. And basically, they've gone with a Solo in those properties because what they wanted to be able to do is in advance ask the customer who's going to rent the Airbnb what mobile network they're on, then they can remotely log into their Solo and switch it over to the right network for whoever's staying at the property. So that's one benefit of that. For you guys, I think that's less relevant because typically you'll be putting it into like residential properties where it's always going to be on the same network. But that is one benefit of the Solo, but the Solo is a little bit more expensive than the GoX. Apart from that, functionally, they're exactly the same. The Solo also has a little green light that tells you everything, and SMA in and SMA out. Right, so here we're on sort of the real interesting bit. So use cases and how you would typically install them. So our most basic use case is something like this. So you have a donor source. So this is your antenna on the roof. That is connected via RF cable to the GoX. And if you remember what I said in, I believe it was part 2 of the webinars, best practice is to try and minimize this distance. So the distance between your antenna on the roof and the GoX should be kept as short as possible to minimize loss. And then your distance from the GoX to your internal server antenna, that can be longer. The reason is the signal coming out of the GoX is a much higher gain than the signal coming in. So ideally, you want to minimize loss between antenna, donor source, and the GoX, and then you still want to minimize loss between the GoX and the server antenna, but it's less of an issue. Your system will still perform well. This is a bit longer. So that's a very basic install. Now, where things get interesting is when we try and do more complex things. And I think this is the bit that people tend to really, I get asked a lot about this. So as an example, here is an example of us using a GoX, but the house has 2 floors. So the way you would do this is you would use a 1x2 splitter, so a standard RF splitter, but what you've got to watch with these, and fortunately we sell the right type of splitters, so you can always just buy them from us. But the key thing about these splitters is they're the same grade as the cabling. So what that means is, whereas we're recommending using a 50 ohm coax, you also are going to want a 50 ohm low loss splitter. Now, we stock these. So the nice thing about using an RF based system is you do have some flexibility on how you perform it, because it is just over RF, and because we've got a very high gain signal coming out of the GoX, it's fine to use a splitter. I generally wouldn't recommend splitting more than 2 times. So I wouldn't be running this into a 1x4, for instance, just because I think the loss is a little bit too much. To be honest, it'll probably work, but you'd be better off buying 2 GoXs to get maximum performance. Now, where things get really interesting is what we can do when we have multiple networks. So this is actually a diagram of an install we did recently, where somebody wanted all 4 networks to 2 main locations in the property. So it's just actually an upstairs and downstairs. I talked with Cel-Fi and checked that this would work. And this is actually the system that was installed, and it worked perfectly. So what is going on here is we have 4 GoXs. So each of these GoXs was configured for a different network. So that's the 4 main networks in the UK. So what happens is there's 4 GoXs, each configured for a different network. There is then 4 antennas, each pointing in the right direction for wherever that network's nearest antenna is. So again, in part 2, I believe, I described how you go about finding that information. But essentially, they found out where the nearest base stations were, and there are 4 antennas pointing at those base stations. So we've got 4 GoXs, 1 for each major network. Now, the cool bit about what we did here is internally, we still only wanted to have 2 actual antennas on display to keep things neat. So what we used is a 4-to-1 combiner. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but actually a combiner and a splitter are exactly the same thing. So if you go on our website, you will see that we sell 1x2, 1x3, and 1x4 splitters. Those products can also be used as combiners. So the electronically is exactly the same, whether it's a combiner or a splitter. It just depends which way around you put it, basically. So what we have is 4 separate networks going into the GoX coming out. That signal is then combined down to 1 signal. That signal is then split twice. So now you've got a single aerial in each location, antenna, sorry, not an aerial, that is giving off network for all 4 mobile networks. So in this property, they have 2 floors, and both those floors have boosted coverage for all 4 networks. And price-wise, for this hardware, it came out somewhere in the region of about £3,500, which is a good ballpark figure to go with if someone has sort of a small to medium-sized house and they say to you, I want a boosting system for all 4 networks. As a general rule of thumb, if you do things this way, the hardware is going to cost about £3,500, so you probably want to be charging £4,000 to £4,500, I would say, as a solution. If they just ask you, how much would it cost to do this for all 4 networks? But the key thing here is, obviously, if they say only wanted 3 networks or 2 networks, you could reduce this hardware. So you could have half as much hardware to do less. So yeah, for about half the price, you could do 2 networks, for instance. But that is how you would do 4 networks into 1. You could, if they weren't bothered about having 4 antennas on display, you don't necessarily need this 4-to-1 combiner. You could have, for instance, just each GoX goes into a 1x2 splitter and then has its own separate antenna. But this is a much neater way of doing it. And this worked really well. This system went in over December. The first time we've tried doing it with combiners, and it worked fantastically. The client's really happy with it. So yeah, that's great. We'll probably be selling more of these. You might even see actually shortly us coming up with some sort of package deal where you can just buy all this hardware as a single package, because I think it's pretty good sort of point to base things off. So a bit about the application. So there is an app for doing this. Oh, sorry. One thing I should mention, if you do an install like this, turn the GoXs on one by one and configure them. One problem we had was that actually if all 4 GoXs were on, the app struggles to differentiate between all 4. So what you want to do is turn one on, configure it for the network, then turn it off, then turn them on one by one and go through them. And then once they're configured, you don't have to worry about it. But that was one little issue we ran into, is realizing that you really wanted to have these turned on separately. So Cel-Fi Wave is the app that you're going to use to configure your system when you buy them. It's pretty straightforward. It's available on Apple Store and Android. So if you've got a single Cel-Fi Go X or Cel-Fi Solo system, what will happen is you will launch the app. It'll ask you to enable Bluetooth, and you have to say, yes, I want to enable Bluetooth, and I want to let the app use my Bluetooth settings. And then the app will find any Go X's that are in the area. You then find the Go X. There's a few bit of information. You've got your main dashboard, settings, and advanced. You've also got some information about how your system is currently configured. So a couple of good notes about this. So this is actually the most useful part of the app. What this tells you is 2 things: the network strength of the macro network donor and how much you can boost it by. So this first bit, what that is telling you is the quality of signal you're getting on the antenna on the roof or outdoors or wherever you put the internal antenna. That's what that is telling you. And the second figure is telling you how much the system is able to boost by. Now, that is determined, if you remember, back in part 1, I described how this system has some anti-oscillation tech to stop the device picking up its own signal. That is this figure. So essentially, it can only boost up to the point when it starts detecting feedback. So if this number is low, like say it's saying it's got a boost figure of 2, what that means is your internal antenna is too close to your external antenna and they're picking up each other's signal. So if you create more separation, then the system's going to be able to boost a lot more. So in an ideal world, you have the antenna on the roof facing away from the house, and then internally, you've got your internal antennas that are sort of in the middle of the house and well away from that antenna. If you do things that way, the system will be able to apply a lot of gain to the signal, and you'll get a very strong signal indoors. But this will tell you, how your system is working. So ideally, what you're looking for is good network strength on the macro network donor. So that is telling you good signal strength on the roof, and then good boost signal strength as well, which means it's able to boost the signal significantly. The next part is the settings. So it's in this part, the settings menu, where you can choose your operator. So if you purchase a system in the UK, you'll be given a choice of 4 operators. So that'll be EE, Vodafone, O2, and T-Mobile, I think. So that will basically, you choose then at that point which operator you want the system to boost. You can change this at any time. So if your customer decides he wants to switch his system over, or they get a new phone, they're with a different operator, you can change that. But yeah, within here, this is where you will select which operator you would like the system to boost. And then on the last page, it just gives you some information about what we call the advanced settings, about which network it's boosting and which frequency it's choosing. It'll also gather some information about how strong each individual band is, and then it'll choose them. You can get more details for here. I recommend downloading the app and having a play to see all that. I'm not going to go into all that today, because generally this is something that will just happen automatically. So it will choose which bands to boost and things like that. But yeah, that's all in there. If you'd like to see specifics about which band it's boosting and how much it's boosting and stuff like that. So that is the end of my explanation of the GoX. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone with any questions? Yes, give me a second. I'll get that for you now. Hold on. 1 second. Right. That's part 1. That's part 2. So those should be video links to the first 2 presentations. And what will be happening is probably tomorrow an invitation link will come out to part 4, which is about the Quattro system. So by all means, I'm sure I'll see you all next week for part 4. But yeah, those links, because you've attended this session, you'll get a link when this is over with the video in for this one as well. So you actually have to log into this platform and see this video again. But there'll be another Google Drive link available for everything. I think they're all going up. If you find OneAV's YouTube page as well, they're all up on there as well. So if you want to find them there, that's where they are. Good. Well, if anyone has any other questions, by all means, fire them out. Otherwise, I thank you very much, and I will leave it there and see you all next week. Great. All right. My pleasure. Here's all our social media bits and pieces. By all means, if you don't follow us on any of those, just add us in. If anyone wants my email address, I'm just putting my email address in the chat. So if you have any other questions you think of, or if you have any projects, one area I'm heavily involved in at the moment is I do sort of consult on projects. So if you have a potential project for this you'd like to discuss with me, just have a chat with me, send me over the plans. I'm more than happy to look over your plans and make recommendations on how I would do a mobile boosting solution, even if it's very complex. So we've got tons of projects going on at the moment, lots of stuff. So the cable between the GoX and repeater, generally what you want is some 50 ohm low loss coax. We sell some stuff called Web 400 and Web 600, but there's more information about it in the second video, Pete. But essentially, yeah, so low loss 50 ohm coax. What you're looking for is to have less than, so if you look at the spec for some RF cable, what you'll see is there's normally an amount of loss at 100 meters at 2100 hertz, or sometimes like 2000 hertz. So what you're looking for is to basically do your maths and work out how much loss at the distance you need there is at 2000 hertz, because the highest sort of mobile frequency that this product will boost is 2100. So if you find actually some suitable cable where there's less than 10 dBs of loss at 2100 hertz, then you're good to go. But if you prefer, just have a chat with us and I can sell you reels of cable that will be good for any distance. Generally, we use Web 400 up to about 40 meters. Then beyond 40 meters, we upgrade it to something called Web 600, and they work at about £2 to £3 a meter. They're pretty heavy duty, but we know they're tried and tested. We've used them in loads of installs, so we know that it's good stuff. Yeah, and the connectors as well. So generally, yes, it is. So on this system, you have 50 ohm coax all over the place. With the Quattro system, which we'll talk about next week, what you do is you have 50 ohm coax from the antenna to the main system, and then you switch over to cat cable. But for this system, you want to use 50 ohm coax throughout. Yeah, and connector-wise, Steve, so generally what you use with 50 ohm coax is something called N-type connectors. We can supply those as well, but they're like crimp connectors that have very heavy-duty ends. They look a bit like, let me just see if I've got, I might have my slides from the last, hold on, look at this. So this is just some slides from last week, but what you end up with is some connectors that look like this. So this is an N-type crimp connector. This is what you end up with, and then you have some, yeah, they're pretty standard on any chunky coax, which this is, because basically it's got to have low loss. But yeah, so any questions about those, just fire them over to me, and I'll make any recommendations you need on connects and stuff. But yeah, this stuff's all sort of pretty standard. The only bit you can get caught out on, and why we tend to do a lot of sort of consulting on this, is where it can get complicated is obviously this cabling has got N-type adapters, but then you need extra adapters because this GoX uses SMA adapters. So you need to make sure you've got the correct sort of N to SMA adapter. And as I say, we've got all of them. So if you know what you're doing, on that project I showed you where we had 4 of the different networks, the one place we got caught out with is needing a different type of N-type adapter because the splitters and combiners are female N-type, and then you've got male N-type on the cable, but then you need female N-type to male SMA, and it all gets very confusing, but we've got a grip on it now. But yeah, you can, as I say, if you've got a project you want to chat about, just fire me an email, and we'll go over them. This is if you guys aren't currently offering this as a service you can offer from your company, this is something you can easily add into your repertoire. And so there's a lot of people sort of jumping on this now and doing this. Anyway, thanks a lot for your time, everybody. I'm going to shoot off. If anyone's got any questions, there's my email address. Just fire them over and I'll answer them immediately. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.